Super. Well, welcome everybody. So glad to meet you this afternoon. Couple of things to say before we get going. This webinar is going to be recorded, and the recording of the webinar will be available on the YouTube channel. And a copy of the slides will also be sent to all the participants. So don't need to worry about missing anything, and it'll be really easy to access all the information afterwards. So I'm Nick Robinson, and as I said earlier, very pleased to meet you this afternoon. And I hope I'm going to be able to share some information that's going to be useful for everybody today. As you might have seen from the blurb about this webinar, I've been coaching, well, actually, this is my 25th year of professional coaching this month. So I'm really happy to celebrate that. And along the way, I ended up writing a book. So what you're going to get today is a kind of distillation of some of the key things from the book that we know are helping people. But the story I would love to be able to share with you this afternoon really starts about 12 or maybe 13 years ago, when I was asked to coach someone who was just 1 or 2 steps away from losing their job. And this person was an established professional, a senior leader in a large organization. And the HR director described this person to me as someone who was extremely difficult and scary and obstructive. And when I went to talk to some of their colleagues said to me, he's a monster, Nick. He's horrible to work with and a monster to work for. So, of course, I was really intrigued. What would I find? And would I even be able to coach someone like this? But what I actually found was someone very different. Just someone who was almost bewildered by what was going on and really just trying to do their best in what for them was a very challenging situation. And so after our first session, I left feeling a little concerned that I'd been taken in by this person, fooled by them. Somehow they pulled the wool over my eyes and maybe they were a monster after all. But that turned out not to be the case. And in the end, we coached together for about 6 months and created some fantastic changes in how this person behaved at work and how they approached their key relationships. And I started to get very curious about all this kind of stuff, like what was going on? What kind of situation could lead to the point where someone's colleagues would describe them as a monster? And what happened then was, the more curious I got about those kind of circumstances, the more difficult people started showing up to my coaching practice. Some of them would be referred, some of them just seemed to turn up out of the blue. But that's what happened, and that's what led to my book and why I get to meet you today. So, of course, most people at work are not difficult at all. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's sometimes very hard to deal with when they are, because it's just outside the realm of our normal experience. So today I'm going to talk to you about how to deal with difficult people, whatever kind of difficult person they might be, and how to build great working relationships, whatever the situation you find yourselves in. And back when I started getting all those difficult people turning up to my coaching practice, I told my wife and my daughter that I might need to make a thing of it, that this kind of difficult people and really tricky situations might need to be my coaching niche. And I half expected them to try and talk me out of it, because frankly, it seemed like a bit of a daft idea. But they both said to me, oh, well, no, that makes perfect sense, Nick, because of course, you are such a difficult person yourself. Now, I think that's a little unfair, but you'll have to decide for yourselves based on what you see this afternoon. And I want to start by talking about the costs to a business and the people that are in it that can be caused by a difficult person. And there are perhaps 3 types of costs to organizations when someone has become too difficult to get along with. And a great escape is often the first sign that there's a difficult person in your business. Because they say that you don't leave a job, you leave a bad manager. And as many as 75% of the people who've quit a job say that a bad manager was part of their reason. And this is expensive. It costs money to recruit a replacement. We know that's up to somewhere between 50 and 100% of an annual salary for a senior professional. And that's before you take into account the loss of income or fees that can also happen if a senior fee earner has been forced to quit. And even something like £100,000 was a figure that one of my clients mentioned to me when they lost a fee earner who took their client following with them because of a bad manager in their organization. And then there's quiet quitting. And quiet quitting because of a bad manager is also something we've heard lots about recently, and this also costs the business. We know that companies with disengaged employees are typically 15% less productive and have 30% lower customer satisfaction rates. And then thirdly, there's what I call management fatigue. This is another useful sign that you might have a difficult person in your organization because it's emotionally and physically draining to work with. It takes huge amounts of time and effort. And another client said to me, Nick, I've got nearly 40 people in my department. And this month I've spent around 80% of my time just dealing with the fallout from this one difficult person. So if you want to tackle this kind of situation before it gets to the point where it's costing money and effort, here's the kind of mindset that can often be really useful. And there are perhaps three things to bear in mind when you're dealing with a difficult person at work. And the first is that usually someone who seems to be difficult at work is actually someone trying very hard to do what they think is the right thing in what for them can be really difficult circumstances, and often in the only way that they know how. And this perspective is called positive intention. And I'll say a little bit more about it later because it's a really useful one. And the second part of the mindset that's important to understand is that different is not the same as difficult. We all have different ways of behaving and being at work and different ways of relating to other people. And one principle of my book is that we need to be flexible about this to adapt our behaviors to meet the needs of other people and the situations that we find ourselves in. And difficult is what happens when the impact that someone is having is so negative that it just can't be accommodated. And then if we meet a difficult person in the morning, well, that's just a part of life, isn't it? And if we meet another really difficult person later on in the day, well, that's been an unlucky day, hasn't it? But if we're meeting difficult people all day, well, either we're in a really bad situation and we maybe need to get out of it, or perhaps we need to reflect on our own behavior a bit more. And to do that, I'd like to take a look next at one of the principles from my book that can really help, and that's fierce kindness. So fierce kindness is the idea that getting on with people isn't about being nice all the time, but neither is it about being intolerant and confrontational. And I think the best leaders have this dynamic combination of both fierceness and kindness. They do everything they can to understand and put themselves in other people's shoes, bags of empathy. Plus, they do not mess around. When they see behavior that's wrong, they take steps to deal with it, and they're really straightforward and direct in doing that. And I think the reason they have that great combination of fierceness and kindness is because how we behave towards each other at work is important. Good relationships at work are worth protecting for all kinds of reasons. And I'd like to explore your own experiences of this a little next, please. Here's how we'll do it. I'd like you to remember a time when you felt misunderstood at work and bring to mind what led to that misunderstanding. And I'd love you just to take a couple of moments to reflect on that and understand what was going on for you at that time. And this is a great way of starting to build more empathy about other people who might be in difficult situations and also to garner some insights about how we deal with it. So I'm just going to stay quiet for about a minute, give you time to do some reflection yourselves. Great, thank you, everybody. Now, there should be time for us to have a Q&A using the chat function at the end of here. So if you have any questions or anything that came up for you when you were doing that self-reflection, it'd be great to hear from you at that point if you've got something that you would love to share with us, or even something you would like to ask me about that. And I want to talk next about, why do people become difficult at work? And I think perhaps there are 4 different things that are really helpful to know about why people do become difficult at work. And the first is just the reactions to the stresses and strains of everyday working life. Perhaps, for example, there's a stretching target to achieve, maybe the business itself is struggling, or it could even be something outside the business, like a new competitor entering the market or a new regulation to deal with. And then there's that principle we talked about earlier, positive intention. The idea that a difficult person is usually someone trying very hard to do what they think is the right thing in what for them is a really challenging circumstances, and often in the only way that they know how. And of course, for the rest of us, it often doesn't seem like that. It can seem more like that person is deliberately trying to do the wrong thing. But if we want to deal with what's happening and even help that person and make something positive out of the situation, then we do need to at least start from trying to understand their perspective. And then thirdly, there's the little self-doubts and self-sabotages that can often make things worse. This is like the little voice that can whisper in your ear, you're no good at this, or people will find out you don't know what you're doing, or even things like, oh, it's all going to go horribly wrong. That these kinds of self-doubts can often amplify people's stress reactions and keep us stuck in a cycle of negative behavior. And then there's the inflexible approaches, habit really, always doing things the same way because that's how we've always done it. So that's why people become difficult at work. And next, I want to explore one of those aspects a little bit deeper. That's the stress strategies. So this is what happens when someone is dealing with way too much stress at work, or they've been outside their comfort zone for too long, or even too far outside their comfort zone. And some people will disconnect. So their stress strategy is to take themselves away, separate themselves off from the rest of the business. And everybody on the top line here does that in some way. For example, on the top left, we've got this yellow face. That's the scary specialist. And the scary specialist is the expert who really isn't afraid to let you know that they're the expert. And if they're under stress, they really just want you to go away and leave them alone to get on with things without interference. Now, other people have an excess reaction to stress. They will just keep on trying harder and harder and harder. Take the revolutionary, for example. That's the upside down orange face in the middle here. So the revolutionary is the kind of person who wants to change everything all at once as fast as they can. And of course, if you put that kind of person under stress, what do? Well, they try and change things even more, even faster, without worrying about whether or not they've got consensus, or without worrying about the fallout that their actions can sometimes cause. And the third group of people have stress responses that are all about avoidance. They try to make sure that things don't go wrong or that no one gets upset. Take the people pleaser, for example. That's the face on the bottom right with the big eyes. Now, people pleaser usually is a very friendly and trusted person, but they will actively ignore all kinds of problems and go miles out of their way to avoid having a challenging conversation that might upset someone. So that's how people react to stress. And next I want to look at one of the ways that people can become too set in their ways and too rigid in the way they approach things. And that's attention focus. So attention focus is a person's unconscious preference for how they approach things, how they view their work and how they view the world around them. And it's normal to have an unconscious preference for one or other of these ways of looking at the world. And the problem is when we get stuck and we can't shift the focus of our attention to suit the people and the situation around us. And again, that stuck in one way of looking at things tends to amplify those stress responses. Take someone who has a task focus, for example. The green face on the middle left, that's the driving force. Now, a driving force is someone who likes to see everything as a challenge or as an achievement to be ticked off, which of course is a useful skill to have sometimes. One of my clients said to me, "Oh, Nick, but if you get in their way at the wrong time when they're trying to achieve something, it can be like being hit by a truck." Now, other people have a systems focus, like the dark strategist. That's the person with the exploding head in the top middle, for example. Everybody with a systems focus sees things in terms of how they're interconnected and how everything in an organization tends to join up. So it's like a kind of mass chain of cause and effect. And a dark strategist really will treat people badly if they don't think those people share their systems focus. They'll make you feel a bit stupid, treat you like an idiot, try and manipulate you and move you around in the dark like a chess piece because you don't really deserve any more consideration than that. And the last group of people have a people focus. They see everything in terms of people's thoughts, feelings, and social status. Like the empire builder, that's the person with the sunglasses in the middle right, for example. Now, empire builders are usually highly charismatic people. They're natural leaders and their charisma draws other people to them. But they can sometimes be so concerned with having those other people idolize them that they really won't tolerate any criticism. And they'd often rather shoot the messenger than deal with anything complicated. So here's what happens if you put those two dimensions together. If you put the three stress strategies together with the three sets of attention focus, you get a 3x3 matrix, and that's my 9 types of difficult people. And back when I was about halfway through writing my book, I got a call from Pearson, the publishers, and they're, "Oh, hey Nick, how's it going?" So yeah, it's going well, thanks. I'm just about to deliver another draft chapter to you. And the chief editor says to me, "Oh, that's great, Nick, but are you sure it's 9 types of people?" So of course I start panicking. Is there something wrong with my research? Do they think some of the types are badly described? "Oh, no, the editor says. It's great. We love the writing. It's just that books with a 7 in the title tend to sell much more." Well, anyway, we stuck with 9 types because of the 3x3 grid, and here we are now. And next, I'd like to take a look at some of the tools that everybody can use, whatever type of situation you might be in, or whatever type of difficult person you might be dealing with. And what I want to do here today is draw out some of the themes from my book, some of the tools that will always help. And these will help whether you're working with a difficult person or if you're their leader, or even if other people might be suggesting that sometimes you're a bit difficult to work with. And as I go through these, I'll give examples of how they relate to some of the specific types of difficult people too. Let's start with fixing fast. So fixing fast is about dealing with things that aren't working before you try and develop your people. And it could be something really small, like one of the teams I was asked to help with, who were basically just at each other's throats all the time. They had this remote login that took forever for them to get started. So they always started their day on the back foot. They'd log in late. There'd be loads of messages on Teams, and they just struggled to start the day in a positive mindset. Sometimes there are bigger fixes that need dealing with, and these are often a leadership issue, things that leaders need to fix before they start trying to develop their people. And there's maybe 4 things that come up a lot. The first is communication, because people need to really understand what's happening in their organization, why things are happening. They need to try and find meaning and purpose in their work. And if your communications aren't doing that, then some of the types of people can become very difficult at work indeed. And conflicting priorities also come up as a common issue. One of my types of difficult people is the martyr, for example. And the martyr is someone who is a highly principled person. And they can often get caught between 2 stools of thought in an organization. If the priorities aren't all joined up, the martyr will sacrifice themselves trying to make sense of conflicting priorities. And they'll often burn themselves out and burn out their team at the same time. So organizations need to take steps to make sure that all their priorities kind of do make sense together, and that other people aren't trying to drive the agenda without letting other people know. And the third thing is, whatever the situation, take action. So my experience has been that the best way to make a tricky situation at work is to do nothing, or to really tolerate something that shouldn't be tolerated. And I think perhaps that leaders don't do anything about a difficult person at work because they're not sure if you can do anything without making the situation worse. So it helps to believe that change for the better is always possible. And perhaps that's where self-doubt can come in. So let's look at that a little bit more now too. Well, self-doubt is often a really unconscious thing. People don't know they have it. And it comes out in all kinds of ways. Sometimes as a lack of confidence, but for some people as way too much confidence. It comes out as imposter syndrome, that sense of we don't think we know what we're doing and we're worried that other people might find out. It comes out as blaming other people when things do go wrong, which is a classic way of giving away all of our power at work, or indeed of thinking that everything will go wrong in the first place. And it's a big driver of behavior. Self-doubt makes difficult people hard to work with, and it keeps us stuck in a cycle of negative behavior. So we need to help turn self-doubt into self-belief using these next two steps. And the first step is awareness and acceptance. And this is about understanding that everybody has their version of self-doubt. And I think we need to become much more conscious of this at work and make sure that people aren't denying that this happens. And the second step is to make sure that people have opportunities to discover for themselves that they can achieve things and be successful even when they have self-doubt, that the one doesn't preclude the other. And I think if we can do that, it helps people also to be much more flexible in how they approach things, which we'll look at next. Well, flexibility, of course, is the opposite of being stuck in one way of doing things. And it helps us deal with a difficult person because it's about keeping on trying to make things better until we find a way that does work. And this is really useful to remember if you're leading or working with a difficult person, because remember, they are the ones who are stuck. We're not stuck. So we can try different things until we find a way of getting a better response from them. And typically a difficult person is only looking at things with one of those attention focuses that we mentioned earlier, on tasks or systems or people. And helping them shift that attention focus can often be a great way to help them become unstuck and therefore less difficult. Take someone like the difficult person I call the warrior, for example. Now, a warrior is a really task-focused person, and they can become a terrible micromanager if they focus too much on the tasks and don't stop to consider how their behaviors are making the people around them feel. And then another way to be much more flexible is to think of someone that we admire or respect and who probably does things differently to us. And then we can ask ourselves, well, what would that person do in my situation? And then do that. Next, we'll look at one of the most important ways of looking after ourselves and looking after others, and in fact, the whole organization when there's a difficult person at work, and that's boundaries. So boundaries are a great way of making sure that other people don't mistreat you or take advantage of you or behave badly around you. And some of the types of difficult people are more likely to cross a boundary than others, but it's something that almost always needs to be addressed. Take the difficult person I call the scary specialist, for example. You remember from earlier, this is the expert who really isn't afraid to let you know that they're the expert. Now, a scary specialist can become extremely critical of how well you're doing the job if they don't think you're up to standard. But they also respect drive and independence. So if you stand up to them, if you tell them, no, I won't tolerate being treated like this, it can often help. You'll get a great response from a scary specialist with that. And leaders need to make sure that they're setting boundaries about acceptable behaviors for the whole organization too. Because it's true for leaders that the standard you walk past becomes the standard you accept, and therefore the standard of behavior that everybody else in the organization adopts too. But we don't need to do this on our own. So let's talk about the importance of allies next. Now, if you're dealing with a difficult person or a tough situation at work, it can often feel quite isolating, but it doesn't have to be that way. Whatever type of difficult person you're dealing with, take stock about who might be an ally for you first. And here's a couple of examples about why that's important. Say you're dealing with that revolutionary we talked about earlier. Remember, this is the person who pushes for far-reaching transformation, tries to change everything all at once. But also, they don't worry about getting consensus or getting agreement or worrying about the fallout that their actions can cause. So if you're working for that person or you're leading that person, you need to make sure you're doing all you can to keep in touch with colleagues inside the organization and outside the organization, making sure you've got allies so you can deal with the situation in case it all goes horribly wrong. Or what if you're working for a dark strategist, that person who sees everything in terms of interconnected systems and plans? And they might have closed off the lines of communication to the rest of the organization if they don't quite think you're up to scratch. And they'll try and keep you in the dark and move you around like a chess piece and manipulate you. Well, don't let that happen. Make sure you're building alliances so that you can talk to other people, stay informed about the rest of the business, and have help if you feel manipulated. So those are the 5 tools that will always help build great working relationships. Fix what needs fixing and do it fast. Help people turn their unconscious self-doubt into self-belief. And practice flexibility in how leaders and others approach things. And for all of us, and leaders included, to set the right boundaries set the right standards of behavior by patrolling the boundaries vigilantly. And lastly, to make sure that you're finding allies and not trying to do it alone. And I guess for all of us to be a good ally for other people at work too. So next, I'd like to discover a little more about your own experiences and how you've had to deal with things. And again, take a moment or two to remember a time when you had to deal with a difficult person, either at work or somewhere else. How did you deal with it? Did you use any of the approaches I've described, or maybe you had to do something different? And what made the situation easier or harder for you? So just take a couple of moments, please, to do some self-reflection on when you had to deal with a difficult person. And again, I'll be quiet for a minute or so. Thanks. Well, thanks very much, everybody. I hope you're getting some great self-reflections there. There's often like tons and tons of insights just to find in reflecting on our own experiences, and it often does come down to those things about trying to stand in somebody else's shoes, but making sure we're patrolling the boundaries at the same time and not doing it alone. So I hope those things are useful. I want to tell you about one of my own favorite success stories dealing with a difficult person. And this was with a classic empire builder. This was the managing director of an engineering firm. And they'd built up this really successful business almost from nothing. But then when their market started to change, they had new competitors coming in, new ways of doing things with some extra technology. Their business really started to suffer. And this empire builder, rather than dealing with those things, actually made it worse, because some of their key people started coming to them and saying, you know, we need to change before we're really in trouble here. but they absolutely refused to listen to anybody about what was going on. And they had their own kind of mini great escape, because your good people won't stay around if you treat them like that. But in the end, I was able to help this person, but it really wasn't easy. And the reason I think I enjoyed it, and I actually am so proud of it, was because an empire builder like that, as I said earlier, on the outside looks like a really confident leader. And people are drawn to them because of that confidence, and they love to follow their certainty. But on the inside, they can often have loads of hidden self-doubt, just like we discussed earlier. And the reason why this managing director wouldn't listen to their people telling them that the business needed to adapt was because he secretly didn't believe he'd be able to lead that change. He didn't think he had it in him anymore, didn't think he could understand the technology, didn't think he could really kind of muster what was needed to lead his people through yet another round of change. So we ended up doing loads of self-belief work. And I think winning the trust of someone like that and helping them see how they needed to change so they could save their business, which they did, was a terrific experience for me. So a difficult person is almost always someone trying very hard to do what they feel is the right thing in what for them is really challenging circumstances, and usually in the only way that they know how. And I think in the wrong set of circumstances, well, that could be almost any of us. And if that happens, then the worst thing to do is to do nothing. There's always something positive that can be done to change things for the better. And we also know now that our working lives are around 80,000 hours long. 80,000 hours. And for some of the younger people attending today, you know, that could be even more. The research is showing that could be nudging 90,000 hours. That's a big chunk of our lives. And at the same time, we also know that businesses and other organizations can only really deliver great products and great services if the people in them are feeling at their absolute best. So for me, that's why it's worth putting some effort in to make work a place where people can come together and support each other to achieve things together that we couldn't possibly do on our own. And I think then everybody wins. So thank you so much for taking part today. I really hope that's been useful. If you want to get more information about this kind of stuff or access any of the free resources, you can follow the link using this QR code that's on screen now, or the link that's underneath, or even grab a copy of my book. And if you get a copy of the book, you'll see that there's more free resources. There's videos, a free workbook, a quiz to find out what type of difficult person you might be. All of that's accessible from the book too. So I'm going to try and end the show now and see if we can somehow get some questions in the chat. Let's see how I might do that. Okay, so I'm hoping that now you can see me. Hi, and let's see if there are any questions. All right, so here's one from Lottie. Thank you. What's the best way to get a difficult person to consider or agree to coaching without upsetting them? Yeah, and you know what? Actually, sometimes, so it depends on the person, Lottie. Sometimes you kind of do need to upset them for. So somebody like a scary specialist, for example. One of the things I say to their leaders is, in order to get them to access help, you might need to become really scary back to them. So it really helps to kind of understand first what type of person you're dealing with and what kind of stress response they're going to have. With empathy is the best way to approach it, and sometimes that might need to upset them, and sometimes it might be like really kindness. So is it fierceness that's called for, or is it kindness? Use your judgment. Good question, thanks. And if anybody's got any observations from their self-reflections that they'd love to share with us, now's the time to do that as well. Sometimes there's loads of people who want to do that and they're just a bit shy, and sometimes not. All right, and I can see from the chat that some questions are coming in now. All right, I'll just wait until we see what arrives. Thank you. Oh, here's a great question. Thank you. Would you encourage giving feedback without being asked? Yeah, I probably would. Thank you. Especially if part of your feedback might be around the fact that someone's crossed a boundary of yours. Some people don't really have great levels of self-awareness around their behaviors. So if that's going on, it is kind of beholden on us, I think, to tell people like this is the impact that the behavior is having on me. And there's some really good ways of doing that. Like nonviolent communication is a great way of doing that. And this is all about saying, I noticed that this happened. It had this behavior on me. It had this impact on me. In future, I wonder if we could try something different. So rather than saying, oh, you idiot, you did this and it really annoyed me or it really upset me, say, this happened, this is the impact it had for me, and I would like it to be different in future. I hope that helps. Like again, it's about like standing in someone else's shoes and deciding if it's fierceness or kindness that's needed. Oh, and here's another great question. How do you deal with a person with narcissistic personality at work? Well, there's a couple of things to say about that. The first is that's not a term I like to use very much because unless you're someone who's like specifically trained in how to diagnose that, and it's not always an easy thing to diagnose, it can be sometimes that kind of like less positive to apply that terminology than to use the principles I've just discussed. So for example, someone who kind of only sees the world through their view, maybe that's someone narcissistic, or maybe it's just someone who like only feels safe doing that. And you know, I'm not a qualified psychotherapist, although I have actually coached. I've coached 3 people who are in charge of secure units in this country, and they all say similar things. So although I can't speak as a professional in that field myself, I have coached with people who are professionals, and they say the same things. If a boundary has been crossed, then you need to say a boundary has been crossed. If you're dealing with someone who seems to be stuck in one way of behaving, then some feedback about how behaviors might look different can really help. And find allies. So it really does come to those things. Another great question here as well. How can we deal with a manipulative and a difficult person at the same time? Yeah, and this is another great question because one of the things that people who are being really difficult will do is they will try and manipulate you. Like the dark strategies, for example, it's much safer for some people to try and move other people around without considering them as individuals than it is for them to engage with us as individuals. So if that's the case, same things again. Has a boundary been crossed? Do you have allies at work? Where can you seek support? How flexible can you be in your own behavior? So can you find a way of communicating back to that person that the impact of their behavior is having a negative effect on you? And can you find a way of doing that which kind of gets through to them? So is that about saying, it's not helping with my task? Is it about saying, you know, this doesn't make sense, it doesn't all joined up? Or is it about saying, this is how people need to be dealt with? Oh, and here, thank you. Here's another great question. Once the unwanted behaviors are recognized and rectified, are they easily maintained, or does it require constant work? And I kind of feel the person who's asked this question knows the answer, because the answer is yeah. It's like it's constant. It really is constant. And This is why it can be really draining. So until we can find a way to kind of help people turn their self-doubts into self-belief, because those self-doubts are often what's driving their behavior. Until we can help them do that, and until we can help them be more flexible in their approach and understand that sometimes they need to be thinking about tasks, sometimes it's about people, and sometimes it's about how everything joins up. Until we can get them developed to do that, then it probably will take some kind of constant input to kind of keep them on the straight and narrow. So if you're asking that as a leader, that person who asked that, if you're asking that as a leader, get them some development. And there's some great stuff in my book around what kind of development tends to work for each person. And if you're asking as a colleague or as someone who's got a boss who's a bit difficult, then yeah, I'm afraid you're in for a bit of constant work. Sorry. What's the best way to engage in difficult people without them taking it personally or involving HR? I know some people who are slightly oversensitive and would immediately make it an HR issue. Yeah, great question, isn't it? It's surprising how this comes up. In fact, one of my clients said to me, "Oh, they've kind of weaponized their sensitivity," which you can understand, because the reason they're sensitive is because they have those self-doubts and they have hidden concerns about their own ability to deal with stuff. So that's why they're sensitive, and they'll try and act first before you can kind of do anything positive about it. So the best thing in that kind of situation is the person who asks that question is don't do it on your own. Like, make sure you've got allies and make sure you've got support in the way. Whether it's someone from HR or whether it's somebody like me, get support. Don't try and do it on your own. Yeah, and here's another great question. I've found maintaining boundaries challenging, with a response from others feeling you are being unreasonable and inflexible. Yeah. And I'm assuming that that's not the case, right? That someone just doesn't like the fact that you've laid out a boundary. I guess sometimes we can be a bit inflexible in our boundaries. So I would look at that first, but I'm guessing the case for the person who's asked that question is that probably not that they're being reasonable, but just other people don't like it. And I've had the same situation myself. So I worked for quite a while for a classic warrior, and he was such a micromanager. And whenever I tried to try and set that boundary of, like, this is my job, like, please just like leave me to do my job, he just, like, he wouldn't. He was back on it again, until one day I did this really massive overreaction with him, really deliberately. I took all my papers, slammed it down on the desk and said, look, if you know how to do my job so well, why don't you often do it? And I just stormed out. And the next I knew about it was his boss's boss was knocking on my door saying, look, I'm really sorry this happened. We're going to try and get in some development support so that doesn't keep happening. So sometimes I think you do need to be unreasonable and protect your boundaries, as long as it's like in the service of your own health and in the service of getting your job done, and you're not really being unreasonable. I hope that helps. Oh, and same thing, actually, just occurs to me, that last question about maintaining boundaries, allies as well. Like, make sure you're not the only one trying to do this, that you have allies. This is such an important principle at work, that we don't kind of isolate ourselves and try and deal with this stuff by ourselves. Oh yes, yes. Just a response to the question. Just responded to their own question there about resorts to being direct and firm. Yeah, great. I think that's a good way to do it. Otherwise, there's no point in having a boundary if you don't stand up for it. Good stuff. All right, looks like we're at the end of our questions. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I hope you found that useful. There's loads of great resources on my website and at the link there. And just as a reminder, this is being recorded, so It'll be on the YouTube channel, so everybody should have access to that, and copies of slides sent to attendees as well. All right. Thank you very much, everybody.